Hi, everyone. This is Jill from the Northwoods. I learned early on a lesson about other people that helped me do better in life. It was confusing to me, right? My dad was smart, could read the most difficult books and magazines, taught me math, taught me calculus at a very young age, was all about making yourself better, educating yourself, becoming a stronger human being. And yet, he was a sarcastic, at times, alcoholic. He couldn't bring himself out of that. And no matter how many times the military forced him into some form of rehab, he just couldn't get over it. And so here you had the pros and cons of both sides of him. There were other people in my life who were more sensitive. However, they were not strong. They couldn't give their abilities. They couldn't get ahead in life because they just were so sensitive to everything that was going on with them. And even in my own self, I was very flexible. I could do lots of things at different times. I had the ability to pay attention and learn multiple skills all over the place, but I couldn't focus, and I couldn't focus on one thing to get things done. Then it started striking me, and like I said, we're doing these in order of how I got myself out of the ditch in life. Very early on, I learned people are a coin, and there's two sides of them. It's probably a bad analogy because people are very complex and probably have many sides of them. They're probably like one of the D20 side dice that you play in Dungeons and Dragons. But it struck me that when you look at a person, they have strengths, they have weaknesses, and oftentimes they are related to each other, their strengths and weaknesses. My grandmother, tough as nails. Nothing ever got her down. She never took no for an answer. She made the people at Sears take back luggage she gave to my parents as a wedding gift that the handle broke. And so 12 years later, the store is supposed to take back a piece of luggage that broke through regular use. Nope, she did it. She practically made that person cry, but I was with her when she did it. Strong individual. But she had troubles warming up to people. She was a warm person, but she never let that side of her show. So then I started realizing maybe that's the whole piece of it, is that we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and they always are related to each other. And again, me included. That's common. As I grew up and then I later became a psych major, I realized, oh, this is a common way to happen. And one thing to keep in mind is that at some point, some traits are useful, practical. I was a supervisor. I supervised over 60 people at a tech company years ago. I was the kind of person who could build people up. My company back then fired everybody. It was a horrible, this was a different company I was worried about being fired from. This was a company where it did not allow you to take sick leave. It was just awful in so many ways. And I was a supervisor. I was so scared I was going to have to fire people because they weren't good enough, because they took too much time off in a row, something like that. I ended up being the coaching boss. I wanted to make sure that everyone who wanted to stay at this company could stay at this company. That was my strength, coaching people, building up teams of people. I am a builder. I will get you a whole team of people who can do the job, probably like the job, and are not going to break the rules. But then when it comes time to be someone who has to make, visionary decisions and chop teams up into a million pieces, I probably wasn't that person in that same way. So in one sense, I was a great boss. In another sense, I had other problems. I was great at keeping contracts. I was great at making sure every dot of the contract was kept. But when it came time to maybe fighting back and saying to the customer, this is unreasonable, I was not so good at that. And so that's part of the problem, is that at sometimes my talents made me a great boss, and at other times it made me not so great of a boss. It just depended on what the context was. The other part of it too is that sometimes when we are strong in something and weak in others, we can turn on a bad aspect of our strength at the wrong time. So think of my dad. My dad was clinically scientific. He was very smart. He could keep that edge right at the time. But when something emotional happened, he suddenly would fall apart, and that critical, sharp-edged thinking became cruel. That it came out of him. He couldn't realize this was a context switch. This was a time for him to not have this intense overload of his strength and back away a little bit. He just couldn't see it. Same thing with me is that I now see that at times I try to make everyone get along. Obviously, you can see when you have two parents who don't get along, as a kid, you become that person who tries to get everybody to get along. And when people don't get along, suddenly I go into overdrive trying to get people to get along. And sometimes it's just not appropriate. Sometimes people are just not going to get along. But when you're in the heat of that moment, your strength notices there's something weak about you, and then it kicks in. I think about it like when I hurt my ankles. I screwed up my left ankle. And so what happened? I started leaning on my right leg to the point where I broke the tendons in my right leg too. You start leaning on something so hard, you just don't even see you're doing damage to your situation. The other part of it too is that you just don't see because you have a strength at something, that your strength has a hidden cost, has a problem associated with it. You don't see at times that the thing that you're good at is making this situation worse, because in general, it's the old time saying that when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. So of course, my dad would think, well, of course we're going to logic ourselves out of every situation. But sometimes it's not logical. Sometimes it's emotional. Sometimes it's just human. And it's a blinder to that person. So let me give you some examples. I gave you the one about my dad. I gave you a few of myself. But there's confidence and arrogance. Sometimes when you meet someone who's very, very confident, they come off as arrogant, kind of like jerks all the time. But that confidence serves them well a lot of the time. I've seen people who own businesses who are very successful at confidence, because you have to go in and sell people on your ideas and be hardcore about your product or your business, and particularly in the software world. But at the other time, now you're kind of arrogant and you got the best product, and how could anyone ever have a product better than yours? I worked for a company where the owner of the company didn't really believe other software should exist. Those other people should just go away because, clearly my software is the best. Boy, right? Or think about perfectionism versus paralysis. A person who is good at being detail-oriented, dotting every I, at times can procrastinate or have burnout or just can't delegate, right? I'm always going to do the better job. It's always going to be better when I do the job. And so they're stuck with everything. But the other part of it too is that they might not start, or they might just decide, I don't want to start new things because I know if I do, it will have to be perfect. But think about me, who I'm good at seeing the forest. I'm good at looking at the big picture. I can dot every I if I have to do it, but that's my weakness, right? Is that sometimes I have to go back and then dot every I. Because to me, everything's about big picture. So I'd say something to a friend of mine, right? I'd say, hey, just so you know, they're going to go to the game tomorrow and we should meet them there. Okay, so let's say I used the wrong there. Mistake, I knew better. I knew it was the wrong one, but I'm writing this quickly and I'm trying to get it done. And so then the person on the other side of that says, oh, by the way, you look kind of like an idiot because you don't look like you can do grammar. All right, when I was trying to get this out fast, I was trying to get this done. You see, so my inability, or I would say my strength of seeing the forest and the landscape of what's going on, impedes me on being able to see the detail of it. Think about someone who's very empathetic. They can get over emotional about things. They can feel other people's feelings. They can understand and connect with people. They can be there and help them in so many ways. But either they're always emotional, they struggle with boundaries, they are taking on too much internal burden on themselves, and now they're either never seeing the logical side of things, but sometimes they're also just killing themselves on the inside. I, at one point, thought I was going to be a psychiatrist and go into that, and it's kind of why I was going through psychology. I wanted to help people. And luckily for me, I realized I take on everyone's burdens. I swallow them. I'm like that Star Trek show, The Empath, where she would heal someone and then she would take on their injuries. It was damaging to me. And I realized, at least luckily, before I went down this path, I'd be a great, probably, therapist, I think. But I would also injure myself. Okay? Adaptability versus lack of direction. Think about it this way. Very adaptable people who can go left or right, who can swim in any lane they want, might have struggle having commitments, consistency, doing everything the same way. I'm someone who is that person, right? I'm very adaptable. I'm always changing things up. I'm always trying to improve whatever it is I'm doing. This podcast, the videos, everything like that. But that means that at times I lack consistency because I'm always trying to edge the game up a little bit. What about ambition versus being a workaholic? Great, you're ambitious, you work hard, you try to climb the ladder at work, you try to do all the things that you need to do in order to maybe make money or get prestige or just be higher up in the company. You could lose out on being with your family, your children growing up, on just having some downtime, of relaxing a little bit. And sometimes you can step on other people. I saw so many people in my tech job who were just so ambitious. They walked right up the corporate ladder, stepped all over all of us who had been long-term employees of the company, and then the very first chance there was a time to leave that startup company, they were gone and doing something else. It was so funny because my boss loved those ambitious people and didn't, I would say, respect loyalty as much as I thought he should. And he would get these ambitious people who would be gone in 2 months. You could see it coming every single time, but he, being an ambitious person, loved ambitious people. He just didn't realize they weren't going to stick around to do any good in the company. How about cautiousness versus someone who is hesitant? A very cautious person will try to avoid, think about risk, try to avoid everything. However, their hesitation could cause them to miss opportunities, could cause them to miss out on something really great in their life because they're so cautious and they're so unwilling to take any risk at all. So in the end, what do we do about this? We see the situation here. And so this idea is that, first of all, we all realize we need a little balance. That I know about myself that I can tend to be, like I said, on the harmony side of things. I always try to get people to get along. But I know that is a rut I go into all the time. And so at times, you have to have that ability to say, no, this line I am standing on. Here I stand. I can go no further. Having self-awareness so that you know your strengths and weaknesses, so that when you see how you leaning into one over the other, you know how to balance it out a little bit. Or even sometimes just admit, hey, I'm just not the best person in this particular situation. I am the great person if you want to build your team up and have them be a team of 60 people who all are great at their jobs. But if you're really looking at someone who'd be a hard-nosed contract negotiator, you might want to look somewhere else. That's hard to do, particularly in the work world, to say someone else might be better for this situation. I'll give you an idea that at one point we were creating in my tech startup company something that was called customer success. I can tell you, I knew more customers. I knew what they needed. I knew what they wanted. I understood the customer base better than anybody else in that company. And so I went to the person who was the vice president in charge of this job, and I said, I heard you're going to have a customer success person. I would love to be that person. I know them better than anyone else. And she says, oh, well, it's a sales job. It's not a understanding our customer job. And I went, oh, well, I'm not a salesperson. And so as much as it killed me, I never applied for the job, and I stepped back because I knew this particular position was just not going to be for me. So, and the other part of it too is, what do you do then? You got self-awareness, you're trying to come up with balance, and you're trying to be a little bit more adaptable and understand which way you need to go on this. Reflect on yourself a lot of times so that you understand, have I been leaning too much on this side or that side? Am I too lopsided in my opinions or my ability? I recognized early on in my life that I'm not good at sales, and I'm not good at pushing people, and I'm not good at sometimes doing the hard things in relationships or work relationships. Like I said, that hard contract negotiation. So I realized it was a weakness of mine. So I started reading books about how to be a nice person in negotiation. So let's say at one point I was a contract manager at that software company ages ago, and I had to negotiate contracts. Like I said, great at managing a team of 60 people and getting them all up to speed so they're a great team working together. Not so good when the contract negotiation came. What I started to do is I would reframe the issue to say that this contract, the way that they were arguing this contract, was bad for my company, which made it bad for my team, which made it hard for them to live with the rules and constraints on there. And now I was able to fight for them because I saw the nice person side of it. Even if it was doing with money, if our company fails, all these people are out of work. And so I learned through these books how to reframe a situation. The other part of it too is seeking feedback. How can you see I could do this a little bit better? Was I a little bit weak in this situation when I should have been harder? Am I being a doormat too much? I ask the questions like that. But instead, you can get some feedback and pick people who are on your side. I've had some very lucky situations where I've had people who were just on my side and helped me out quite a bit and taught me how to be tougher without being a bad guy. And that helped a lot. Then the other part too is, can you journal, record your days and what you did? When you start doing that, you'll start to see patterns in your own life. These are situations when I tend to back down. These are situations when I tend to stand up. You'll learn something about yourself. You'll learn how you tick and what makes you do things one way or the other. Then the other part of it is that you just realize this is a side I'm bad at. And so if you were an ambitious person, work so hard, you realize that you're going to have to be a bit mechanical at it, but schedule time with your family. Or say, at 6 o'clock, I go home, no matter what, to eat dinner with my family. Something like that. You draw a line in the sand. The other part of it, too, is realize that almost every time, extremes in any personality trait aren't great. And so that you can start striving for moderation and writing down some ways that you could be more moderate in this particular opinion. My dad could have realized I'm very logical, I'm very scientific, but sometimes that doesn't always work for me. Sometimes I just got to be a nice guy, something like that, and sort of get a little bit self-awareness and then try to embrace that balance a little bit. And then remember, too, that while I said we were two sides of a coin, it's not really true. We're more like a dial. Sometimes we're way up at 11, and sometimes on our weaknesses, we're way at minus 11. But realize that traits are usually along a sliding scale. I am a very nice person, but I can be very direct if I want to. Instead of thinking of myself in black and white, it's better thinking of myself, this situation tomorrow is going to call for me to be a little bit stronger and a little bit more pointed than I'm used to being. I coach myself. I come up with some strategies on paper for this meeting tomorrow, and then I figure out a strategy for doing that. I know this about myself, and so can I just nudge the dial just a little bit more? You can even practice, maybe with a friend who could help you, or look in the mirror, or put it on recording so you can see how it looks like when you're talking with this issue. But instead, if you can practice what you're going to say, or practice an aspect of your personality you're just not very good at, that will help you a lot. And sometimes it's forceful. We think about a person who, I tend to be someone who just works on my own. I tend to be a loner. I was an only child. I had to do everything by myself. And at that company I worked at, that was very hard. I had to do everything by myself. If I asked other people for help, the company saw it as a sign of weakness. At the company where I was the boss of 60 people, there was no one to help me. I was graveyard shift manager and contract manager. There was no one there to help me. So I tend to be kind of a lone ranger in my efforts. And so sometimes you have to think, Jill, think about how you can bring people in. Think about how you can make other people a part of your project. They'll learn by it, you'll learn by it, and you'll probably balance things out. And so then the other part of it is that if you do have problems, train the other skill. If you're confident, Get some books on humility. If you're in perfectionism, there's some fantastic books, one by John Acuff, about overcoming perfectionism. If you're not very adaptable, learn how to, every once in a while, throw a wild card in. Go to a different restaurant, go to a different place, decide you're just going to take the day off and just drive in a direction, but start learning that stability. The other part of it too is that you can ask, I mentioned before, other people in your project, but sometimes you can have people who are better at the thing you're bad at, and together, working on it together, you're going to make the perfect team. My best friend and I, it's funny, we are opposite personalities. She is type A, I am type B. She is, even on Myers-Briggs, she is ISTJ, I am an ENFP. We are the opposites in every way. And we have learned over the years, because we're best friends, to complement each other. So we know when one of us kicks in and the other one stays back, or the other one kicks in and the other one stays back, or when that other person needs a little bit of encouragement. So together as a team, darn near make the perfect person. Then the other part of it too is asking in every situation, which traits, not even thinking about yours versus your weaknesses or anything. Right now, I have a contract negotiation, writing down some strengths that would be the best thing I need. What's the right tool for this job? It's not bad if I were putting in new windows in the house for me to go and make a list of all the tools I need. Why is it bad for me to look at a human situation and write down what is the right tool for this particular job? Pause a minute before I jump into doing some work and instead evaluate it, give it a little time, and start thinking about it. And think a little bit too about what are the risks if I am weak at one of the tools or I am great at one of the tools. What are some things that I could do that might cause problems? Even that sort of like that pre-analysis of the job. So I can say, well, Jill's a really nice person and she tends to be a little bit weak. And in this particular case, you have someone who has a hard personality. Let's say we met someone who's just very tough, a tough nut to crack. And if I'm too nice to that person, they're going to be like, oh, Jill's a pushover. That person's going to run all over me. They're going to stomp all over everything I have to say. How can I now think a little bit about how this negative thing is going to happen because of the way my personality is? And the other part of it is understand you're never going to be perfect. This is a trait. It's not bad versus good. It's just a bit of how you are. Life is about growing. You are going to get better or weaker at times. That's what we do. In all of our lives, we are growing to be better, to fix our weaknesses, lean into our strengths, and find a balance. And even part of it too is to be kind to yourself and understand there's going to be times I'm going to mess up, and I'm probably going to mess up in this direction because that's more my personality. So the big thing too is when you're learning about that is realize everybody's two sides of a coin. It's not just you. Everybody's like this. Everybody is one way or the other, tends to be good at this, but bad at that. And so just understand people are like that. How can you be a better complement to them? Just like how could they be a better complement to you? Part of it too is understanding when you're dealing with yourself or you're looking at flaws of other people to understand there's more to them underside here. I knew someone who, oh gosh, she was hardcore and she was just hard to deal with. And I realized she grew up in a very hard situation. She was not someone who was treated very well. She hasn't had a lot of love in her life. And so maybe instead of showing her a little bit of, why is she so difficult? Be loving. My grandmother grew up an Eastern European. She had a really tough life. She was a refugee in different countries many times over. And her parents were sort of that hard, we're poor and starving to death. They were actually starving to death. We need to just survive. We don't have time for your silly emotions. So she grew up in a situation that is entirely different about it. Can you learn and understand that person a little bit better about it? And then the other part of it too is that you might just understand, I guess in a sense, that if you have a friend who's a perfectionist and she's always picking at the things you do, just understand, hey, you know what? She has high standards. That's how she ticks. That's how it goes. I know about my best friend that she does not like risk. And I always joked because my cats, whenever I would get them a new litter box or new bed or something, I would have to pick them up and say, here is your new litter box, and show it to them. And they'd be like, oh, this is my new litter box, or this is my new bed, or here's my new toy. And you had to show it to them first and give them a little time to get used to it. And I realized, okay, this is going to be mean, but that's the way my best friend is too. You cannot spring things on her, but you can show her the litter box, not a litter box, whatever it is you want to do. Like, let's say I wanted to go to a new restaurant. She's never been before. She's going to be risk adverse and say, well, I don't want to go to a restaurant I've never been for. I printed out the menu. You would probably like this. Look at that. I noticed that there's that sandwich you really like. There it is there too. So let's just give it a shot. So her seeing me be prepared for her questions will make her feel more at ease. So if you're dealing with someone, you can also ease them by understanding them better. And then being, in the end, grace, mercy, forgiveness. Everyone needs it, and we can give it to our loved ones too. And the other part of it is that sometimes you realize when dealing with other people, and maybe even dealing with yourself, there are some things that people are just not going to change. There are ways that they will change, and they'll grow, and they'll expand, and there are other ways that they won't. There are some things that is very much like me as a kid. You could recognize me as a kid. If I ran into a teacher that I had when I was in, second grade, they would recognize me. I'm pretty much that same person. Some things I've grown in, and some things I haven't. Same thing with my best friend. There are so many ways, I couldn't even list them to you, of how many ways she has grown in the years we've been friends. But there are some things, it's kind of at a core of her personality, and you just have to realize that, you know what? Sometimes that's just going to be how they are. It's fine. Some things are evolving, some things will never change. And maybe you can be okay with that. So I was trying to think of some interesting ways we could do things when we have someone or ourselves who has like a particular skill and they don't see the other side of the coin. And part of it is if it's someone else who's having that, think about them as a video game character. I used to play EverQuest back in the day, and you'd say, oh, this person does this person, and you would know how the video game would play out. And we understand it because that character was built to be a healer or a this or that. And so you understood their character. And so if we think of someone with a backstory, like in video games or in books or stories, you'll understand them a little bit better. Or maybe, I don't know how all this would work. I'm kind of curious to try it myself. Could you have an opposite day where maybe you and a friend decided you're going to play opposite roles? So my friend is going to be more open, wanting to do new things, want to try new exciting things, and I'm going to try to be more risk adverse and ask great questions about, what does this restaurant have? What hours do we even know if they're open today? That kind of thing. Or I think the example I gave, to remember that everything is a dial and is not black and white. Or maybe a good step in the right direction is if you have a friend and you and your friend are very different, you're two sides of a coin, each of you, is each of you take turns naming a strength and a weakness. I noticed you're great at talking to people, but I also noticed too, sometimes they overrun you and they step on you like a mat. And maybe if we talk about our strengths and weaknesses with someone we love dearly, in a tone, in a way that we're not going to get offended, they could be helpful, and each person could learn a little bit more about themselves. And in the end, I always think about that 100-year rule, where if there are things that are going on, in 100 years, is anyone going to remember this? In 5 years, are you even going to remember this? Next week, are you even going to think about this? Instead, try to put things in perspective with other people, knowing, in the end, this doesn't matter. It's just fine. So that way you could overcome or work with other people who are a little bit different than you are, but also that you're both two sides of a coin. And in the end, if you're working with other people, like I said, try to figure out how to work together with people, whether it's work people or friends or anything that you're trying to do. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. We're all paradoxes. We're all messes. We're all good at some things and bad at some things. And instead of going around and trying to fix everyone, including yourself, maybe just realize, you know what? This is a wacky world we live in, and everyone, well, they're their own special kind of nut. Everyone, thanks so much. I appreciate you listening to the third problem we're covering of how I got myself out of the ditch. Learning that everyone has pros and cons. And how do you deal with yourself? How do you deal with other people? and just learn to love and understand people, even when sometimes it's hard to do. Thanks so much. I appreciate you watching. Please remember that you can leave a comment in the channel. You can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. I'd love to hear from you either way. Tell a friend. Like I said, we're going to go through this step by step. Unfortunately, I don't have a book to recommend. I do try to recommend a book or some sort of material I use to make me better, but this was just an observation all by myself. So have a great week. I appreciate it, and I can't wait to see you next week.